Greetings, I'm Professor K, and in this short video presentation we're going to look at the importance of choosing the right naming convention and IP addressing scheme for your network. At this point in the course, you should have installed the operating systems for your 3 networking devices that you're going to use in your virtual lab environment. And now we're ready to move on with configuring our first domain controller, which will be our root domain controller for our new domain. For this demonstration, I'll be using my full install of Server 2016, and I have Server Manager up and running. Now that I have my naming convention and I have settled for what I'm going to call this domain, I'm now ready to move on with renaming my first domain controller of the forest to something more conducive, and that will allow me to identify it much quicker and easier if I have to find it or troubleshoot it. To rename this server, just left click on the name of the machine, and that brings up the system properties. Here we just click on the change button, and now where it says computer name, I can type in the new name of my domain controller. When I'm done, all I have to do is hit OK. We're prompted for a restart before the changes will take effect. I'm going to say OK to that. I'm now going to close the system properties dialog box, and now I have the option to restart. I'm going to go ahead and restart, and when we come back up, we'll take a look and we'll see that my first domain controller of the forest has been properly renamed. My server is back up. My server manager has started. I'm at the dashboard. If I click on where it says local server, we can now see where it says computer name that the name for this machine is now DC1. So we're now ready to get on with the IP addressing of our network and IP addressing our first domain controller. For this demonstration, I have taken a Class C block of IP addresses and used that for my addressing scheme for this network. Starting with 192.168.145.0, that is my networking portion of my IP address. I see that my subnet mask has the first 3 octets full. That means that the only hosting IP address that I have left will be in that last or the 4th remaining octet. That gives me 254 possible hosting IPs. Now I need to get some IP reservations. So I normally do this in a very straightforward fashion. I assign the first available IP address to the inside interface of my firewall. This is where everybody has to go to get off of the network, so that I can help streamline the troubleshooting process or connectivity issues. I know that if I need to get to the firewall, my IP address will be 192.168.145.1. That will always be the case. My IP address for the network may be different, but I will always use .1 for my default gateway. Now that is not a hard fast rule. Some people want to use .2, some people want to use .254. That's fine, as long as you understand what your IP addressing convention is. You're good to go. So I've taken the .1 from that first small block that I have reserved, starting with .1 through .9 of my IP addresses available for my hosting. This first block, .1 through .9, will be reserved for all my networking devices. Now, I may only have 1 firewall and I may only have 1 switch. That's fine. I have to allocate, or I have to allow for growth. Normally, I like to allow for at least 50%, if not 100% of growth, but I know that if I need more IP addresses, let's say I need more than 2, I'll have them reserved, and there will be no need for me to redesign my IP scheme. This all makes sense to me because I know that if I have devices that fall within the range of .1 to .9, these are networking devices such as switches and IPSs that I can locate easily. So what about my servers? Well, for them, I'm going to set aside the IP addresses starting with .10 all the way up through .19. Yes, I'm only going to have 2 servers on my network, but I have to allow for growth. So if over the next 5 to 7 years I have to add 5 or 6 new servers to my network, I will have the IP addresses reserved to accommodate them. Now, printers are one of those resources that everybody wants to have. So make sure that you allocate enough IP addresses for your printers so that I can find my printers and identify them much easier. I am going to set aside or reserve the block of IP addresses starting with .20 all the way up to .29. Now that leaves me with IP addresses starting with .30 all the way up to 254 for my host, that is to say the workstations. So now if I only have 10 or 20 workstations, I have plenty of IP addresses in reserve for additional hosting as needed. Now, a word of warning. If you allow individuals on the network to bring their own devices and they have to connect wirelessly, you will want to make another reservation for those individuals so that they don't consume all of your IP addressing and then walk away without it being released. You'll soon find yourself short of IP addresses if you don't. Alright, so now we're going to get into the process of IPing my first server of the network, my root domain controller. Now that my server manager has completely refreshed, I can click on that second option where it says local server. That brings up the properties for the server inside of the center window pane. And I can scroll on down where it says Ethernet. Move on over just a little bit to the right, we come to where it says IP version 4 address assigned by DHCP, and it also says it's IP version 6 enabled. If I click on this with my left mouse button just once, it brings up my networking connections. I find my local area connection. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go to Properties. Under Properties, I'm going to find where it says Internet Protocol version 4 and in parentheses TCP/IP version 4. I'm going to go ahead and double click that, and that brings up the properties for my Internet Protocol version 4. Now currently this server is receiving its IP address dynamically from either the VirtualBox DHCP server or the VMware DHCP server. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on this option right here where it says use the following IP address. This is how we're going to assign a static IP address to this machine. In this first box where it says IP address, in the first octet I'm going to type in 192, then I'm going to type in 168, then in the third octet I'm going to type in 145, then this last octet, octet number 4, that's for the host IP addressing. Now remember, I reserved for my servers IP addresses starting with .10 all the way up to .19. So I'm going to give this machine the first IP address in that block. I'm now going to hit my tab key. That tabs me on down to the subnet mask. We can leave the default gateway blank. And we're going to not worry about the DNS for right now, because later on when I do make this machine a DNS server, it's going to automatically assign itself a loopback address in the box where it says preferred DNS server. We click OK. We're going to click OK one more time, and we're going to close out the network connections. And back here at my server manager, if I go over here and click on the refresh, it should pop up and show me that I have an IP address assigned of 192.168.145.10, and it does. Now that we have statically configured this machine with its own IP address, we are ready to move on with installing the roles of DNS, DHCP, and Active Directory. In this short video presentation, we saw how we go about renaming our server, and we also got to see how we go about designing our IP scheme and assigning a static IP address to our first root domain controller of the network. That's going to conclude this short video presentation. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns about any of the material that was covered in this short presentation, please do not hesitate to reach out and contact your instructor, and I'll see you in my next video.